stars glimmered like tiny shards of glass across the vast black of space. Among them, the planet Zeloria Prime rotated slowly, its surface crisscrossed by rivers of silver and green plains that stretched farther than the eye could see. High above the planet, the capital city floated, a web of towers and bridges suspended by anti-gravity fields. It was a city of beauty and power, home to a civilization that prided itself on intelligence, strength, and control. In one of the tallest towers, the noble alien woman, Lyria, stood at a crystal window, watching the sunrise across the horizon. Her skin shimmered like polished bronze, and her eyes were a striking silver, reflecting the light of two suns. She had grown up in a world where duty came before desire, where decisions were guided by logic rather than emotion. And now, at the age of 200 cycles, a young adult by her species' standards, she was about to perform one of the most important duties of her life. The message had arrived weeks ago. A human representative had been selected for a political marriage. The arrangement was meant to secure peace between Zeloria and Earth, a small, strange planet far across the galaxy. Humans were considered weak, emotional, and unpredictable, but they had resources, ingenuity, and a stubborn spirit that even the greatest empires had noticed. To Lyria, this marriage was a tool, a contract, nothing more. She turned from the window as a soft chime announced the arrival of her advisors. They were all tall, elegant, and meticulous, moving with a grace that humans could only dream of. "Are you ready, High Lady?" asked one, his voice like silk over metal. Lyria nodded, smoothing her ceremonial robes. "I am, though I wonder if this human is truly capable of understanding our customs." The advisors exchanged glances but said nothing. It was not their place to question the council's decision. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the human representative prepared for the journey. His name was Ethan, a man of average height, brown hair, and calm, focused eyes. Unlike many humans, he did not feel fear at the thought of meeting an alien civilization. Instead, he felt curiosity, determination, and a quiet confidence that came not from arrogance, but from experience. Ethan had studied alien cultures, languages, and tactics for years. He had read reports on the Zelorians' history, their battles, their politics, and their philosophies. He knew that the people of Zeloria prized intelligence and foresight above all else, and he knew that his role in this marriage was more than symbolic. It was a test of humanity itself. The journey through space was long, but Ethan used the time to prepare. He reviewed treaties, practiced diplomatic gestures, and meditated on the importance of patience. Unlike the aliens, humans were not naturally long-lived, but they compensated with resilience, adaptability, and a spark of creativity that no machine or weapon could match. When his ship finally approached Zeloria Prime, Ethan looked out at the floating city with a mix of awe and focus. This was no mere diplomatic meeting. This was a stage, and every human had learned that sometimes survival depended on knowing when to act and when to wait. The day of the ceremony arrived. The council hall was massive, with walls of crystalline panels that reflected light in every direction. Delegates from multiple star systems filled the space. Their forms varied and strange to a human eye: tentacles, wings, exoskeletons, scales, and translucent skin. Each represented a world, a people, and a perspective that made Zeloria the center of the galaxy's political power. Lyria walked down the hall with the grace expected of a noble, her robes flowing behind her like liquid metal. The crowd whispered as she passed, awed by her presence, and some whispered doubts as well. The marriage was controversial. Many believed that a human could never live up to their expectations. When Ethan entered the hall, he did not rush. He walked steadily, his posture calm, hands visible, showing no weapon or device. His presence was simple, almost ordinary, and yet it drew attention. Many delegates murmured to each other, underestimating him as they often did with humans. They did not see what Lyria already noticed: a quiet strength, a mind that observed without judgment, a calm patience that contrasted sharply with the alien tendency to act quickly and decisively. The ceremony began. Rituals were performed, lights and symbols arranged, and words spoken that carried centuries of tradition. Lyria and Ethan stood across from each other, and for a moment the room fell silent. All eyes were on them. Lyria expected awkwardness, fear, or hesitation. What she saw instead was focused attention. Ethan mirrored the gestures, respected the customs, and maintained composure. He was nothing like the weak, emotional creatures she had been told humans were. After the ceremony, a feast was held. Delegates mingled, and Lyria found herself observing her new husband closely. She noticed small things: how he listened carefully to each speaker, how he asked questions that revealed understanding, not ignorance, and how he carried himself with a quiet confidence. "You seem different from what I expected," Lyria said softly, once they were alone on a balcony overlooking the city. Ethan smiled faintly. "I hope that is a good thing." She studied him. "I assumed humans were fragile, easily broken." "They are not," Ethan replied simply. "We survive because we must, and we think because thinking keeps us alive." For a moment, Lyria said nothing. The words resonated with something deep inside her. She had never considered that the creatures she had been taught to see as weak might have a strength that was not obvious. That night, the city above Zeloria Prime seemed quiet, but far beyond the planet, the galaxy stirred. A neighboring empire, seeing the marriage as a sign of weakness, began to mobilize its fleets. To them, the Zelorians were distracted by ceremonial politics. They assumed humans were incapable of defending themselves, incapable of fighting alongside aliens who had mastered warfare for centuries. The first reports reached Lyria in the early hours. Enemy ships were approaching the system, faster than predicted. Alarmed officers scrambled to prepare defenses. Many expected disaster. Ethan, however, remained calm. He observed the reports, scanned the maps, and reviewed the positions of the ships. Where others panicked, he calculated. Where others hesitated, he considered options. "Prepare the council fleet," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But do not act rashly. The enemy will make mistakes. They always do when they underestimate humans." Lyria turned to him, shocked. You think you can stop them?" Ethan looked at her, eyes steady. "I do not know if I can stop them, but I know how to survive. And survival is the first step toward peace." As dawn broke over Zeloria Prime, a small fleet of enemy ships appeared on the edge of the system. The council braced for destruction, but Lyria's eyes were fixed on her human husband. She had thought this marriage was a matter of politics. Now she realized it might be the first moment she had truly seen the strength of humans. The hall was tense. Delegates whispered doubts, speculated on strategies, and argued over decisions. Lyria felt a strange sense of anticipation, mixed with unease. She did not know what her husband would do, but she sensed a change in the air, a subtle shift that made even the most confident aliens pause. Ethan stepped forward, calm and deliberate. He requested command access, not because he craved power, but because he saw an opportunity where others saw danger. He studied the enemy movements, anticipated their choices, and began instructing the council fleet in ways that were unconventional, risky, yet brilliant. The alien officers hesitated. Could a human really direct the defense of an entire planetary system? Could he possibly succeed where their most experienced commanders would fail? Lyria's heart pounded. She had married a human for peace, assuming she would guide, protect, and perhaps even pity him. But as she watched him, she realized she might be wrong in every assumption. The first signs of change appeared as enemy ships approached the outer rings. Missiles and energy blasts streaked across space, but the council fleet, under Ethan's guidance, avoided the brunt of the attack. The enemy expected chaos, but instead they faced calm, precise, and intelligent coordination. Lyria felt a chill of awe. The human she had underestimated was not only surviving, he was making the impossible look simple. As night fell over Zeloria Prime, the first day of the potential war ended with no destruction, no surrender, and no death. The enemy ships withdrew slightly, puzzled by the unexpected resilience. Lyria remained on the balcony, looking at Ethan, who quietly reviewed reports and calculated the next steps. She thought about the centuries of teachings that had told her humans were weak. She thought about how wrong she had been. And in that moment, she understood something profound. She had married not a weak symbol of peace, but a human capable of extraordinary things, though she did not yet know how far that capability would reach. The stars above seemed brighter now, and the galaxy felt different, as if a new force had quietly stepped onto the stage. Humanity was no longer a curiosity, it was a presence to be reckoned with. And Lyria knew that this was only the beginning. The calm of Zeloria Prime's morning was shattered by urgent alarms echoing through the city. Red lights bathed the crystal towers in a harsh glow, and the hum of energy shields filled the council hall. Outside, the first enemy scouts had entered the system. The council was in chaos. Alien officers shouted over each other, debating which weapons to deploy and which ships to send into battle. Panic rippled through the room like a wave. The enemy had been underestimated. What was supposed to be a ceremonial peace was now turning into a test of survival. Lyria's silver eyes scanned the room, taking in every movement, every gesture. She expected fear, hesitation, confusion, but what she saw instead was her human husband, Ethan, standing calmly in the center of the hall. His posture was steady, his face relaxed, and his eyes focused on the holographic display of the approaching enemy fleet. "High Lady," one officer hissed, "we cannot hold them. They have 10 times our number. Our shields will fail, our weapons will not reach them in time. We should evacuate." Lyria felt her chest tighten. She had been trained to respond in these moments with careful planning, relying on superior technology and overwhelming force. But she had seen how quickly panic could destroy even the strongest fleets. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. "Evacuation is not the answer. We will survive if we move wisely. Panic leads to mistakes. Strategy leads to victory." The officers froze. None had expected the human to speak with authority. Most had assumed he was fragile, untrained, and incapable of understanding battle. Yet here he was, telling them what to do with a confidence that seemed unshakable. The holographic display showed the enemy fleet approaching in an organized formation. Their ships were sleek, fast, and heavily armed, designed to crush anything in their path. Most of the council believed that brute force was the only way to counter them. Ethan shook his head. "No, brute force will only make them stronger. We need to use the environment, misdirection, and anticipation. Divide their attention, exploit their assumptions, and force them to make errors. They will underestimate us, they always do with humans." "Divide them? How? With what ships?" asked an officer, doubt heavy in his tone. Ethan gestured toward the fleet. "Use the smaller craft to appear scattered. Have them lure the enemy toward the asteroid belts in the outer ring. Then use the heavier ships to strike from unexpected angles. The enemy expects a frontal assault. We will not give them one." Lyria watched, astonished. His plan was bold, unconventional, and risky, but she could see the logic in it. It relied not on superior technology, but on intelligence, timing, and understanding human, or enemy, psychology. "Are you certain?" another officer asked, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of following a human's commands. "I am certain enough to act," Ethan replied. "Hesitation will cost lives. Confidence will save them." The fleet mobilized under his instructions. Small fighter ships darted toward the enemy, pretending to be disorganized. Enemy sensors detected what looked like weakness. They assumed victory was easy. Ethan predicted every move. He directed energy shields to weaken at precise moments, drawing enemy fire into empty space. He ordered the capital ships to move in silent patterns, avoiding direct conflict while positioning themselves strategically. Lyria could barely breathe as she watched the enemy approach the inner system. For centuries, her people had fought wars relying on superior technology, overwhelming firepower, and rigid tactics. And now, a human, someone she had assumed to be fragile and weak, was orchestrating a defense that seemed almost impossible. The first clash came in the asteroid belt. The enemy had fallen for the trap. Small Zelorian fighters darted around the asteroids, firing in calculated bursts, then retreating. Enemy ships collided with the massive rocks or were forced to maneuver sharply, wasting time and energy. "Look at them," Lyria whispered to herself. "They cannot move properly, yet they think they are in control." Ethan's calm voice echoed in the hall. "Exactly. Every mistake they make is because they assumed we would act like them. Humans do not. We adapt." An enemy command ship attempted a direct assault on the Council fleet. Its massive cannons opened fire. Most officers braced for impact, expecting devastation. Instead, under Ethan's guidance, the Council ships had shifted positions silently, and the shots went wide, striking only empty space. Lyria's heart raced. She had never felt such awe before, not for technology, not for strength, but for the calm precision and intelligence of one human. Hours passed. The enemy adjusted, trying to regroup. The Council fleet remained intact, moving in ways that confounded the attackers. For every attack the enemy launched, Ethan had already anticipated a counter. He guided the alien officers with patience, correcting errors calmly, never showing frustration. "Do you ever tire?" Lyria asked him quietly, walking beside him on the bridge. Ethan shook his head. "Humans tire, yes, but we think beyond fatigue. Strategy is not about energy, it is about understanding." Lyria studied him. The man she had assumed would need protection was now the one guiding her people, ensuring the survival of their planet. Even more astonishing was the reaction of the enemy. They began to retreat slightly, uncertain of what they faced. They had expected chaos, a panicked fleet, and easy victory. Instead, they faced a calm, intelligent defense that seemed to anticipate their every move. By the time night fell over Zeloria Prime, the first day of the battle had ended. The enemy had not breached the inner system. Not a single Zelorian ship had been destroyed. The Council was silent. Some could not hide their astonishment. Some struggled to accept that a human had orchestrated this survival. Lyria stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The stars were alive with ships, lights, and the distant glow of the enemy fleet. She looked at Ethan, who remained calm, reviewing the holographic displays as if the battle were nothing more than a chess game. "You are incredible," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced at her. "I do not fight for glory, I fight for survival. And survival is the first step toward peace." Her mind raced. She had married him for duty, for politics, for the hope of preventing war. She had assumed she would guide him, protect him, and perhaps even shape him. But now she realized something she had never expected. She had married a human who could do more than anyone had predicted. The next morning brought a new threat. Enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than predicted. This time, their numbers were overwhelming. Most alien commanders would have panicked. Most humans would have felt fear. But Ethan remained calm. He studied the formation, predicted the enemy's likely mistakes, and devised a plan that was both daring and clever. The fleet would split in precise formations, appearing weaker than it was. The enemy would be drawn into traps, exposed at critical points, and forced to surrender without unnecessary destruction. "Why do you think this will work?" Lyria asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and awe. Ethan smiled faintly. "Because they assume humans are weak. They assume we react like they do. But humans are unpredictable. We survive by thinking, by adapting, by refusing to give up." That is why this will work. The day of the second encounter began with tension so thick it seemed to press on the city itself. Energy shields flickered, weapons systems hummed, and the council hall was filled with officers waiting for instructions. Ethan moved among them, calm and focused, speaking with precision and clarity. The enemy advanced, confident in their superiority. But as their ships entered the trap, they began to falter. The small Zelorian fighters performed impossible maneuvers. The capital ships moved silently, unseen, striking from unexpected angles. The enemy struggled to maintain formation. Lyria could not believe her eyes. She had seen wars fought with fleets 10 times larger than this one, and yet she had never seen strategy executed with such clarity and intelligence. By the time the enemy fleet retreated for the second time, the council knew something extraordinary had occurred. A human, someone they had underestimated, someone they had considered fragile, had outsmarted them, preserved lives, and maintained peace without unnecessary violence. That night, Lyria walked beside Ethan on the balcony, looking at the stars. The city below was alive with celebration and relief, but she felt a deeper awe. "You changed everything," she said softly. "I thought this marriage was for peace, but now I see it is for more than that. You are," he looked at her, calm and composed. "I am not a god, I am human. And humans survive. That is all," she smiled, a mixture of amazement and respect. "Perhaps humans are more than survival, perhaps they are something else entirely." Ethan's eyes gleamed faintly in the starlight. "We will show them in time, step by step. Not through destruction, but through endurance, intelligence, and courage." The stars above Zeloria Prime seemed brighter that night. The galaxy had witnessed the first signs of a new force, one that was calm, patient, intelligent, and unstoppable in ways that could not be measured by size, strength, or weapons alone. And Lyria knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy watched quietly as the Zelorian fleet, under human guidance, held firm against an enemy far superior in number and firepower. Yet inside the council hall, the tension was far from over. Alien officers whispered among themselves, casting uneasy glances at Ethan, the human who had now become the unexpected center of command. Lyria paced near the balcony, silver eyes reflecting both the glow of the city and the distant stars where the enemy fleet lingered. She had thought she knew humans, weak, emotional, and short-lived. She had assumed that their bravery was born from ignorance or luck. But the calm precision with which Ethan had orchestrated the fleet suggested something far deeper. She turned as he entered, calm, carrying no weapons, no gadgets. His eyes were steady, focused. He looked ordinary, yet she knew by now that appearances were deceiving. "You are remarkable," she said softly, almost to herself. "I do not see it as remarkable," Ethan replied. "Humans survive, that is what makes us strong." "Survive?" she repeated, astonished. "Your actions are more than survival. You think faster than anyone here. You anticipate moves before they happen. You make choices that none of us would dare." Ethan shrugged. "We adapt. That is how we survive. We face challenges not because we seek glory, but because giving up is never an option." Lyria studied him, a new understanding forming. She had married a human for peace, expecting someone fragile, someone to protect. Now she realized that the very assumptions she had carried for centuries were wrong. Humans did not fit into the neat patterns of prediction that the galaxy had created. They were unpredictable, unstoppable in ways that were not measured by strength alone. The enemy fleet, though battered and frustrated by the traps, had not yet been defeated. Reinforcements arrived, larger and more coordinated. This time the council feared the worst. They assumed the humans would fail, that panic would set in. But Ethan remained calm. He did not issue commands out of arrogance. He observed patterns, predicted errors, and adjusted strategies in real time. His approach was not to destroy, but to control the battlefield, to force the enemy to reveal their weaknesses. "High lady," one officer whispered nervously, "we cannot keep this up. They are too many. Even with the humans' guidance, our fleet is stretched too thin." Lyria looked at him and then at Ethan. "Do you see what I see?" she asked. Ethan nodded, tracing points on the holographic map. "They are not invincible. They are making mistakes because they believe we cannot adapt. We will survive, not because we are stronger, but because we learn faster." The first engagement of the day began near a dense asteroid field. Ethan had anticipated the enemy's assumption that the Zellorians would rely solely on technology. Instead, he directed the fleet to use the asteroids for cover, forcing the enemy ships to navigate treacherous terrain. Missiles were deflected, energy beams misfired, and enemy formations broke apart. Lyria could not hide her amazement. The human strategy relied not on weapons, but on thinking, observation, and adaptation. Every move was deliberate, calculated, and precise. The enemy, despite their superior numbers, struggled to maintain coherence. "Observe," Ethan said quietly, pointing at a holographic display. "Notice how they assume what we will do next. That assumption is their weakness. We exploit it and they falter." Even the alien officers, hardened veterans of centuries of warfare, watched in awe. This human, whom they had once dismissed as weak, was demonstrating a quality no machine or weapon could replicate: the ability to read, predict, and adapt in ways they could not anticipate. Hours passed. The enemy fleet, frustrated and disoriented, began to retreat temporarily, regrouping for another attempt. The council was exhausted, but Ethan showed no sign of fatigue. He moved among the officers, adjusting formations, refining strategies, and teaching those willing to listen. Lyria followed him silently, her respect growing with every decision he made. The human she had assumed needed protection was now the one ensuring the survival of her people. She felt a mixture of awe, admiration, and unease. She had underestimated him, not just as a warrior but as a force that could change the course of the galaxy. "Why do they underestimate humans?" she asked him as they reviewed the next phase of the battle. Ethan's eyes were calm. "Because they judge us by appearances. They assume strength comes from size, weapons, or speed. They do not see what humans have always known. Strength comes from intelligence, adaptability, and the refusal to give up. That is why we survive. That is why we endure." The second encounter began over the interplanetary system. Ethan's plan was daring. The fleet would split into smaller formations, lure the enemy into vulnerable positions, and strike from multiple angles at once. The alien officers protested at first, fearing confusion and disaster, but Ethan's calm confidence was contagious. As the battle unfolded, every prediction he had made came true. Enemy ships collided with hidden defenses, were caught in crossfires, and were forced to retreat once more. The Zellorian fleet moved as one under his direction, almost like a single organism, responding not to raw orders but to the calculated logic of one human mind. Lyria could hardly believe what she was seeing. The humans she had thought weak, fragile, and emotional were demonstrating a capability far beyond what her species had imagined. It was not rage that drove them, nor aggression, nor brute force. It was intelligence, observation, and the instinct to survive without unnecessary destruction. By the time the enemy withdrew to the outer system for the third time, the truth had become undeniable. Humans were not weak. They were strategic, resilient, and adaptive beyond imagination. Lyria realized that every history book, every assumption her people had held about humans was flawed. She approached Ethan as he reviewed the fleet's status. "I see it now," she said quietly. "I thought humans were fragile. I thought you could not endure what we endure, but you are different." Ethan looked at her, calm as ever. "We are survivors, that is all. We think, we adapt, we endure. That is our strength. Not weapons, not size, not speed, just the ability to face challenges and never give up." Lyria felt a profound shift within her. The political marriage she had entered with a sense of duty was now taking on a new meaning. She had not married a weak representative for peace. She had married a force of nature, a being capable of reshaping the galaxy's understanding of humanity. The final confrontation of the day arrived. The enemy fleet, desperate and overconfident, attempted a coordinated attack on the central system. Their strategy was aggressive, designed to crush the Zelorian fleet in a single strike. The Council expected disaster. Ethan remained calm. He directed the fleet to positions that seemed vulnerable at first glance. The enemy advanced, expecting easy victories. Instead, they found themselves trapped in carefully calculated zones, forced to navigate hazards, and exposed to coordinated countermeasures. Every movement of the Zelorian fleet was precise, every response anticipatory. The enemy faltered repeatedly, unable to understand how a human could have predicted their every decision. It was not brute strength that defeated them. It was strategy, intelligence, and the adaptability that came naturally to humans. As the enemy retreated for the final time, the council fell silent. The battle had been won, not through overwhelming force, but through the mind and calm decisiveness of one human. The implications were staggering. Lyria walked beside Ethan as the fleet returned to the planet. "You have changed everything," she said softly. "Not just for this battle, but for the way we will see humans forever." Ethan shook his head. "I did not change anything. Humans have always been this way. We survive, we endure, and we think. You are only now seeing what has always been true." Her heart swelled with a mixture of awe and respect. She had married a human for peace, expecting someone fragile and ornamental. Instead, she had found someone who could lead, protect, and inspire an entire civilization. The stars above Zeloria Prime seemed brighter that night, as if acknowledging the emergence of a new force in the galaxy. Humans were no longer underestimated. They were no longer seen as weak or disposable. They had revealed a strength that was quiet, enduring, and unstoppable. Lyria realized that she had not only witnessed the power of one human, but also the potential of an entire species. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again, and as she looked at Ethan, she knew that the story of humanity was only beginning. The battle was over. The enemy fleet had retreated, their pride wounded, their assumptions shattered. For the first time in galactic memory, the so-called weak species, humans, had not only survived against overwhelming odds but had done so with intelligence, strategy, and restraint that astonished allies and enemies alike. Lyria stood on the balcony of the council hall, gazing at the returning Zelorian fleet. The city below shimmered with lights of victory, but Lyria's mind was on something deeper. She thought of the human she had married, the man she had assumed would be a figurehead, someone to symbolize peace, but never to lead or inspire. And yet, here he was, standing calmly, reviewing reports as if commanding an entire civilization was nothing extraordinary. "You truly are remarkable," she said softly as she approached him. Ethan looked at her, calm as ever. "I am not remarkable, I am human. We endure, we think, we adapt. That is our strength, that is all." Lyria shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You make it sound simple, but I have seen the truth. You have changed everything. Not just the outcome of this battle, but the way my people, and perhaps the galaxy, will see humans forever." Ethan did not answer immediately. He gazed at the stars above, thinking of Earth, of the countless humans who had survived impossible odds, who had built, explored, and thrived against challenges far greater than technology or size could explain. "Perhaps," he said finally, "humans have always been underestimated, but underestimation is an opportunity. We survive because we see it coming and use it to our advantage." The council hall was quiet now. Alien officers, some of whom had once doubted the humans' abilities, approached cautiously. Their expressions were a mixture of awe, respect, and disbelief. Some spoke softly to each other, realizing that humans were not merely another species, they were something else entirely. One senior officer, his scales glinting in the dim light, stepped forward. We have underestimated your species, Ethan. Your strategy, your foresight, your calmness under pressure, it is beyond anything we have seen. Ethan nodded. Thank you, but this was not just my work. Humans learn from others, from experience, from observation. We survive because we think. And today, survival required the cooperation of everyone here. Lyria felt a surge of pride. She had always known humans were clever, but seeing it firsthand, seeing the respect and even fear that the aliens now held for him, made her heart swell. She realized that this human, this man she had married for peace, had revealed the true potential of humanity. In the days that followed, the galaxy began to change. News of the battle spread to distant systems, and humans were no longer dismissed as fragile or weak. Across star systems, alien leaders spoke cautiously of humans, reconsidering centuries of assumptions. Humans were not merely survivors. They were strategists, thinkers, and unexpected forces capable of shaping entire civilizations. Lyria walked with Ethan through the council chambers, observing the reactions of delegates and officers. Many approached her, eager to understand the human who had changed everything. They call him a god of battle, one whispered, and yet he fights without anger, without cruelty. He does not seek destruction, only control, precision, and survival. Lyria nodded. That is the essence of humanity. They do not fight to dominate. They fight to endure and protect what they value. Ethan overheard the conversation and smiled faintly. We do not need gods. We only need to survive, think, and act when necessary. That is what makes us strong. The political implications of the battle were profound. The marriage, which had begun as a mere political tool, now became a symbol of a new alliance, not just between humans and Zelorians, but a broader understanding across species. Lyria's people realized that humans could not be ignored or underestimated. Their abilities, patience, and intelligence were forces to be reckoned with, even without advanced technology or centuries of training. The alien woman reflected on her own assumptions. She had believed that diplomacy and political maneuvering alone could secure peace. But she had learned that peace required strength of mind, courage, and intelligence. She had married for peace, but in doing so, she had married a human who exemplified all three qualities. Humans are different, she said to Ethan one evening as they walked along the balcony overlooking the city. I thought I understood your species. I thought I knew what to expect, but I was wrong. Ethan smiled. That happens often. Humans are rarely understood fully by others. We are not perfect, but we endure. And when we endure, we inspire others without even trying. Lyria nodded, her eyes reflecting both admiration and a deep respect. She realized that the human at her side was more than a husband, more than a symbol. He was a partner in peace, a teacher, and a reminder of what humans could achieve. The enemy, meanwhile, had begun to reconsider their own strategies. Their fleets withdrew to distant systems, unwilling to challenge humans directly again. They had assumed humans were weak, emotional, and unworthy of fear. Now they knew that humans were not only capable of surviving overwhelming odds, but also of changing the balance of power without destroying anything unnecessarily. Ethan's restraint had been as remarkable as his strategy. He had chosen to avoid unnecessary destruction, to prioritize survival and defense over aggression. This was something no alien leader had fully grasped. Humans could win not through raw power, but through intelligence, patience, and adaptability. Lyria reflected on this as she watched him calmly issue instructions to the fleet. Even after victory, he was focused, ensuring that no lives were wasted, that the fleet remained ready for any future threats. She realized that his strength lay not in a desire for power, but in a commitment to protection and responsibility. The council formally recognized Ethan's leadership. Delegates across the galaxy sent messages of congratulations, admiration, and cautious respect. Humans were no longer a curiosity. They were an emerging power whose methods and mindset demanded attention. Lyria, standing beside him during the formal ceremony, felt a sense of pride unlike any she had known. She had assumed she was marrying for duty, for peace, and perhaps for appearances. But in reality, she had married for far more. She had married a human who embodied the very essence of her species' ideals, and yet surpassed them in ways that even she could not have predicted. "Do you see it now?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced at her. "See what? That humans are more than survival, that they can lead, inspire, and shape the galaxy, that they are extraordinary." Ethan smiled, but there was no pride in his eyes. "I am human. We endure, we think. And we act when necessary. That is all. The rest is up to the galaxy to see for itself." In the weeks that followed, Lyria's people began to change their perspective. The alien empire realized that humans were not just allies. They were partners, strategists, and forces capable of shaping outcomes far beyond expectation. Humans were no longer underestimated, no longer dismissed, no longer seen as fragile. Ethan and Lyria walked together through the halls of the council, discussing plans for diplomacy, trade, and alliances. But their bond had changed. What had begun as a marriage for duty had become a partnership built on respect, understanding, and shared purpose. "We have changed the galaxy," Lyria said one evening, watching the stars sparkle over the city. Ethan shook his head. "We have shown a part of it. The rest is for humans and aliens alike to learn. We survive, and the galaxy sees what survival truly means." She smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "Perhaps survival is the greatest power of all." As the stars continued to shine over Zeloria Prime, Lyria knew that humanity had not only survived. They had proven themselves capable of inspiring awe without aggression, achieving victory without destruction, and shaping destiny through intelligence and courage. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. They were no longer fragile diplomats or minor allies. They were forces of strategy, endurance, and unexpected brilliance. And standing beside her, Ethan was living proof of everything she had learned. That humans could fight like gods of battle, think like scholars, and choose peace when the cost of destruction was unnecessary. The marriage that had begun as a political necessity had grown into something far greater. It had become a union of understanding, respect, and shared vision. Humanity had shown its strength, not through domination, but through endurance, intelligence, and the quiet, unshakable power of the human spirit. And for the first time in centuries, Lyria felt truly hopeful, not just for peace, but for a future shaped by humans, capable of changing the galaxy without losing their humanity. The stars above seemed to shine brighter that night, as if acknowledging the emergence of a species whose greatest weapon was not war, but the ability to survive, adapt, and inspire. Humanity had arrived.